I'm Madeline, 28 female. I live in a small apartment above what used to be a dusty old bookstore, but is now the sweet-smelling home of my life's biggest dream. I'm a baker, and after years of saving every penny, I finally opened my own place, the Rolling Pin. This was supposed to be the story of how my family gathered around to celebrate my greatest achievement, but it turned into the story of how I learned that family isn't always the people you're related to. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The scent of yeast, sugar, and melting butter was my alarm clock, my perfume, and my lullaby. For as long as I could remember, the kitchen was my sanctuary. While other kids were playing outside, I was watching my grandmother, Nana Rose, her hands dusted with flour, turning simple ingredients into magic. She was the one who taught me that baking wasn't just about following a recipe, it was about pouring love into everything you create. "You don't just feed the belly, Maddie," she'd say, her eyes twinkling, "you feed the soul." When she passed away, she left me her recipe book, a worn, batter-stained journal filled with secrets and love and a small inheritance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a seed. For years, I nurtured that seed, working double shifts at a diner, taking on side jobs, and squirreling away every dollar. I wasn't buying fancy clothes or going on vacations. I was buying a dream, one brick, one oven, one whisk at a time. That dream had a name, the Rolling Pin. My family, on the other hand, never quite understood my passion. To them, success was a straight line drawn on a corporate chart. My older brother, Archie, was the epitome of that success. 3 years my senior, Archie was the golden child. He'd graduated top of his class, landed a prestigious job at a finance firm right out of college, and had been climbing the ladder ever since. Our parents, Kyle and Daisy, couldn't have been prouder. My father, an accountant, saw Archie as a reflection of his own pragmatism and ambition. My mother, a homemaker who had dedicated her life to supporting my father's career and raising her children, saw Archie's success as the ultimate validation of her efforts. Dinners at their house were less about family connection and more about listening to the latest chapter in the glorious career of Archie. His promotions, his bonuses, his clever investments, these were the topics that made my parents light up. When I tried to talk about my dream of opening a bakery, the reception was lukewarm at best. "A bakery, Madeline? That's nice, but is it stable?" my father would ask, peering over his reading glasses, his tone laced with skepticism. "It's a lot of work for very little return. The margins on baked goods are razor-thin." My mother would offer a placating smile. "It's a lovely hobby, dear, but a career?" Archie's company offers a 401k and excellent health benefits. Does a bakery do that? They weren't being malicious, they just couldn't see past their own definition of a secure life. They saw my passion as a flight of fancy, a charming but ultimately impractical phase I would eventually outgrow. When I finally secured the lease on the old bookstore, they were shocked. "You actually spent your inheritance on that?" my father had said, his voice flat. "I thought you were going to invest it, like Archie suggested." I tried to explain that this was an investment in myself. But the words felt hollow in the face of their disappointment. Despite their reservations, I pushed forward. The renovation was grueling. I did most of the work myself with the help of my best friend, Henry. Henry was the brother I never had, the one who saw the fire in my eyes, not just the flour on my apron. A brilliant graphic designer, he didn't just offer moral support, he brought my vision to life. He designed the logo for the rolling pin, a whimsical rolling pin with angel wings. He helped me paint the walls a warm, buttery yellow and build the rustic wooden display cases. He was there for every tear of frustration and every cheer of triumph. "They'll come around, Maddie," he'd assure me as we sat on the dusty floor, sharing a pizza amidst the chaos of construction. "Once they see this place, once they taste your croissants, they'll get it." I clung to that hope. I believed that my success would be the ingredient that finally made them understand. As the grand opening approached, I poured every ounce of my energy into making it perfect. The display cases were filled with glistening fruit tarts, flaky croissants, decadent chocolate eclairs, and my Nana Rose's signature cinnamon rolls. The air was thick with the intoxicating aroma of freshly baked bread. I sent out beautifully designed invitations, courtesy of Henry, of course, to everyone I knew. The most important ones were delivered by hand to my parents and Archie. I stood on their doorstep, my heart pounding with a mixture of pride and anxiety as I handed them the thick, cream-colored cardstock. My mom hugged me, her embrace a little too tight, a little too brief. "Oh, honey, this is lovely. Of course we'll be there, we wouldn't miss it for the world." My dad nodded, managing a small smile. "Saturday at 10, got it. We're very proud of you, kiddo." Archie, ever the cool, detached professional, glanced at the invitation. "Looks good, Maddie. Very rustic. I'll do my best to swing by." His casual dismissal stung, but I chose to ignore it. They said they'd be there. That was all that mattered. I imagined them walking in, their eyes widening at the transformation. I pictured my dad, the numbers guy, being impressed by the bustling crowd. I envisioned my mom tasting a pastry and finally understanding that this was more than a hobby. Most of all, I pictured a moment of shared pride, a moment where they finally saw me, not as the other child, but as a success in my own right. The night before the opening, I barely slept. I was buzzing with a nervous energy that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. As I put the finishing touches on a 3-tiered lemon and lavender cake, the centerpiece for the day, I felt Nana Rose's presence in the quiet hum of the refrigerators. This wasn't just for me. It was for her, too. It was the culmination of a dream that had been passed down through generations, a dream baked with love, sacrifice, and an unshakable belief in the power of a shared meal. Tomorrow, my family would finally get to share it with me. The morning of the grand opening dawned bright and clear, a perfect, crisp autumn day. It felt like a good omen. I was at the bakery by 4 a.m., my hands moving with practiced certainty, my mind a whirlwind of last-minute details. The final batch of sourdough was pulled from the oven, its crust crackling a perfect symphony. The espresso machine hissed to life, filling the space with the rich, dark aroma of coffee beans. Henry arrived at 8, armed with a giant bouquet of sunflowers and a grin that could have powered the whole city. "It's perfect, Maddie," he said, his eyes scanning the shop. "Absolutely perfect. You're going to sell out by noon." We arranged the flowers on the counter, adjusted the pastries in the display case one last time, and prepared for the rush. By 9:45, a small crowd of friends, neighbors, and curious passers-by had already gathered outside, their faces pressed against the large glass window. My heart swelled with a pride so intense it almost hurt. This was real. It was happening. At exactly 10 o'clock, I turned the sign on the door from closed to open. The moment the door swung inward, a wave of warmth and cheerful chatter filled the room. The first hour was a blur of activity. "Congratulations! This place is beautiful. Oh my gosh, I need to try one of everything." The cash register sang, the coffee machine steamed, and every table was quickly occupied by happy customers. Henry was a whirlwind, helping me bag pastries, run credit cards, and keep the coffee carafes full. He kept shooting me looks of pure, unadulterated joy. "See, I told you," he mouthed from across the room. I felt like I was floating. Every compliment, every smile from a stranger tasting my work for the first time was a validation. But through it all, a part of me was constantly scanning the door, my ears tuned for the familiar sound of my mother's laugh or my father's distinct footsteps. They were probably just running a little late, I told myself. Maybe Archie was driving them, and he got stuck in traffic. 11 o'clock came and went. The initial rush began to subside into a steady, comfortable flow of customers. I had a moment to catch my breath and check my phone. No calls, no texts. A tiny knot of unease began to form in my stomach. I pushed it down, busying myself with refilling the croissant tray. They were coming. They said they would. At noon, Henry's sister dropped by with her kids and they bought a box of cupcakes. An old professor of mine came in and we chatted for a few minutes. Friends from my diner job showed up and gave me crushing hugs. The support was overwhelming and beautiful, but it also highlighted a gaping hole. Where were they? The knot in my stomach tightened. I started to feel a prickle of anxiety, the kind that starts in your chest and radiates outward. I kept glancing at the clock on the wall, its ticking seeming to grow louder with each passing minute. 12:30, 1:00, 1:15. By 2 o'clock, the reality of the situation was beginning to sink in, heavy and cold. The lunch crowd had thinned out, the bakery was quieter now. Henry, sensing my mood shift, came over and put a hand on my shoulder. "Hey, you okay?" he asked softly. I tried to force a smile. "Yeah, I'm fine, just wondering where my family is." His expression was a mixed. You're of sympathy and a familiar, simmering anger on my behalf. He knew my family's dynamic all too well. "Maybe they got the time wrong," he offered, though neither of us believed it. I pulled out my phone again, my thumb hovering over my mom's contact. Should I call? Would it seem desperate? Annoyed with myself, I opened up social media instead, mindlessly scrolling as a way to distract myself. And that's when I saw it. It was a photo posted by Archie's girlfriend, Jessica. The picture was bright, cheerful, and full of people I recognized. There was Archie holding up a glass of champagne, a wide, triumphant grin on his face. Standing next to him were my parents, beaming with pride. My dad had his arm around Archie, and my mom was looking at him with an expression of pure adoration. The caption read, "Celebrating my amazing man's promotion to vice president. So proud of you, Archie. Surprise party was a success." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. The air in my lungs turned to ice. A surprise party. For Archie's promotion. Today, I clicked on Jessica's profile. More pictures. There were my aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. They were all there at a fancy restaurant downtown, laughing, toasting, celebrating. A video showed my dad giving a speech, his voice thick with emotion as he talked about his son's incredible work ethic and ambition. There were no missed calls, no texts explaining a delay. There was just silence from them, and a loud, joyous celebration for my brother happening at the exact same time they were supposed to be here. With me, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. The warm, happy bakery suddenly felt like a stage set for a tragedy, and I was the only actor. The smell of sugar and butter turned cloying and nauseous. I could feel Henry's eyes on me. I slowly turned the phone screen towards him. His jaw tightened, and a dark look I'd rarely seen before crossed his face. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just said, "Those absolute cowards." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze. I operated on autopilot, smiling at customers, boxing up cookies, thanking people for coming. But inside, I was hollow. The joy had been surgically removed, replaced by a dull, throbbing ache. When the last customer left at 6 o'clock, the silence they left behind was deafening. I stood in the middle of my beautiful, perfect dream, and I had never felt more alone. Henry helped me clean up, his presence a quiet, steady comfort. He washed trays while I wiped down counters, neither of us saying much. There was nothing to say. The evidence was irrefutable. My dream, my life's work, my biggest day, it hadn't even been a secondary thought for them. It was a non-event, easily discarded for something more important, Archie. As I finally locked the front door, the exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass, looking out at the darkening street. My phone buzzed in my pocket. For a fleeting, foolish second, hope flickered. Maybe it was an apology, a terrible explanation. I pulled it out. It was a text from my dad. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the single, chilling sentence, "We need to discuss the bakery when you have a minute." The message sat on my phone screen, each word a tiny digital stone sinking into the pit of my stomach. "We need to discuss the bakery." Not, "We are so sorry we missed your opening." Not, "Congratulations, honey, we're so proud." Just a cold, sterile summons. All the grief and exhaustion from the day coalesced into a single, sharp point of anger. I didn't reply. I let him wait. I spent the night on my couch, with Henry refusing to leave until he was sure I wouldn't just stare at a wall until sunrise. He ordered pizza, put on a stupid movie we both loved, and just let me be quiet. His silent companionship was the only thing that kept me from shattering completely. He didn't push me to talk or rage. He just stayed, a silent guardian against the crushing weight of my family's betrayal. "You don't have to talk to them until you're ready," he said before he left in the early hours of the morning. "You hold all the cards here, Maddie. Don't forget that." The next morning, my father called. I ignored it. He called again an hour later. I let it go to voicemail. Then my mom called. I ignored her, too. Finally, a barrage of texts started. "Madeline, please pick up." Your father and I are worried. This is very immature, just call us back. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost comical. They were worried. They thought I was being immature. After a dozen more messages, I finally typed out a response, my fingers stiff with rage. I'm at the bakery. If you want to talk, you can come here. I needed this confrontation to be on my turf, in the place they had so pointedly ignored. I needed them to see what they had dismissed. An hour later, my parents walked through the door of the rolling pin. It was the first time. They had set foot in the finished space. They paused just inside the doorway, their eyes sweeping over the warm yellow walls, the gleaming display cases, and the cozy tables. My mother, Daisy, recovered first, forcing a bright, brittle smile. Oh, Madeline, it's so charming. You've done such a wonderful job. My father, Kyle, was more reserved, his expression unreadable as he took in the details. He looked like an auditor assessing an asset, not a father seeing his daughter's dream. I didn't offer them a seat. I just stood behind the counter, my arms crossed, a dish towel still in my hand. You wanted to discuss the bakery, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. My dad cleared his throat, stepping forward. First of all, he began, his tone attempting to be placating, we owe you an apology. Yesterday, things just got away from us. Got away from you? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. You mean Archie's surprise party? The one you were at all day? The one the entire extended family was at? My mother rushed to explain, wringing her hands. Honey, we were planning to come. We were going to come first, but Jessica, Archie's girlfriend, she called Thursday night in a panic. The restaurant for Archie's party had a scheduling mix-up, and they had to move it to Saturday afternoon. It was the only time they could do it. It was completely out of our hands. The lie was so blatant, so poorly constructed, it was insulting. A surprise party that Archie knew about, and the entire family was in on this last-minute change? I asked, my gaze unwavering. My father took over, his voice taking on a sterner, more parental tone. That's not the point, Madeline. It was a major career milestone for your brother. He was promoted to vice president. That's a big deal. We had to be there to support him. And my grand opening wasn't a big deal? The question hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. Of course it was, dear, my mom said quickly. But it's a bakery. It will be open today and tomorrow and the day after. Archie's celebration was a one-time event. The casual dismissal of my life's work sent a fresh wave of fury through me. To them, this place, this culmination of years of sweat and sacrifice, was just a little shop that could be visited whenever it was convenient. Archie's corporate achievement, however, was a command performance. So you didn't call, you didn't text, you didn't even send a two-word message saying you couldn't make it because Archie was more important, I stated, laying the facts out bare. We got caught up in the moment, my dad said, his patience clearly wearing thin. Which brings us to why we're here. We need to talk about the finances of this place. I stared at him, bewildered. The finances? What about them? They're my finances. I handled them. Exactly, he said, nodding as if I'd just proven his point. You're a baker, Madeline, not a businesswoman. I've been looking over the numbers you showed me months ago, your business plan. Your projections are optimistic, to say the least. Your overhead is high, and this neighborhood doesn't have the foot traffic to support these prices. You're going to be in financial trouble within 6 months. My mother chimed in, her voice soft and concerned. We're worried about you, honey. We don't want to see you fail and lose your inheritance. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The text message, the urgency. This wasn't about an apology. This was an ambush. They had let me have my little opening day, which they assumed would be a flop, so they could swoop in the next day as the saviors, the pragmatic adults ready to take over and fix their daughter's foolish little project. So what are you suggesting? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I've taken the liberty of speaking to your landlord, my father announced, dropping the bombshell with casual authority. And I've reviewed your loan agreements. I think the best course of action is for me to take over the financial management of the business. I can renegotiate with your suppliers, manage payroll, and handle the books. We can structure it as a formal partnership. Your mother can help manage the front of the house. You can just focus on what you're good at, the baking. He said it all so reasonably, as if he were offering me a generous gift. But I saw it for what it was, a hostile takeover. They wanted to seize control of my dream, sand down its edges, and turn it into something that made sense to them, a safe, boring, parent-managed investment. They hadn't come to celebrate my success, they had come to manage my presumed failure. The audacity of it was breathtaking. To stand there, in the space they couldn't be bothered to visit, and lecture me on my incompetence after so deliberately and cruelly hurting me, was a level of gaslighting I hadn't known they were capable of. The betrayal was no longer just about a missed party. It was about a fundamental lack of respect, a deep-seated belief that I was, and always would be, incapable and secondary to my brother. The crumb trail of lies had led me right here, to the rotten core of my family's dynamic. And for the first time, I wasn't sad. I was furious, and I knew I wasn't going to let them take one more thing from me. After my parents left, leaving their toxic proposal hanging in the air like burnt sugar, I locked the bakery door and sank onto a stool, my head in my hands. The conversation had replayed in my mind on a loop, each word a fresh cut. "You're a baker, not a businesswoman. I've spoken to your landlord. We can structure it as a partnership." They hadn't just missed my opening day, they had been actively planning to dismantle my autonomy. They saw my dream not as something to be nurtured, but as a mismanaged asset to be acquired. The sheer, calculated arrogance of it made me physically ill. I called the one person I knew would understand. "Henry," I said, my voice cracking, "can you come over? They were here." He arrived in less than 15 minutes, his face a mask of concern. I recounted the entire conversation, from the flimsy excuse about Archie's party to my father's audacious plan to take over my business. Henry listened patiently, his anger growing with every word I spoke. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, just staring at the beautiful, hand-painted menu board he'd designed. "This wasn't a last-minute decision, Maddie," he said finally, his voice low and serious. "Your dad doesn't just take the liberty of calling someone's landlord. This was premeditated. They've been planning this." "Planning what?" I asked, though I think I already knew the answer. "To take control," he said, meeting my eyes. "They never believed in you, they never thought you'd pull this off. They probably assumed you'd come crawling to them for a bailout within a few months. But when you actually succeeded in opening, and it looked good and people were excited, they switched tactics. From waiting for you to fail, to engineering a way to take over your success." A cold dread washed over me. It sounded like something out of a movie, too conniving and cruel to be real. But as I thought back on years of subtle dismissals, of my ambitions being treated as cute but silly hobbies, it all started to fit together. "How could they think I would ever agree to that?" I whispered. "Because they've spent your entire life programming you to believe that they know best and that you need their approval," Henry said bluntly. "And they've spent Archie's entire life programming him to believe he's the center of the universe. It's a system, and you just broke it by succeeding on your own." He was right. My entire life had been a quest for their validation. Every good grade, every small achievement was laid at their feet like an offering, hoping for the same praise that flowed so effortlessly toward Archie. And now, my greatest achievement was being treated as my greatest failure. So what do? I felt lost, a sea of betrayal rising around me. "First," Henry said, his voice firming with resolve, "we verify everything. We don't operate on assumptions, we operate on facts. Second, we protect you and your business. And third, we make them understand that you are not their fallback plan, their pet project, or their child to be controlled." For the next few days, we became private investigators. Henry's logical designer mind was perfect for this. He thought in systems and connections. We started with the surprise party. It was almost too easy. Henry's sister's best friend worked as a hostess at the restaurant where the party was held. A quick, casual phone call confirmed our suspicions. The party for Archie had been booked over a month in advance. For that exact date and time, it was never moved. Jessica's story, my mother's story, it was a complete, coordinated fabrication. They had known about the clash for weeks and had consciously chosen to lie. The next step was my father's claim about my landlord. That one made me nervous. I had a good relationship with Mr. Henderson, a kind, elderly man who had been thrilled to see the old bookstore get a new lease on life. I called him, my heart pounding. "Mr. Henderson," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but I had a strange conversation with my father, and I just needed to clarify something. Did he happen to call you recently?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Ah, yes, Madeline," he said, his voice hesitant. "He did call. A few days ago, he said you were having some financial anxieties, and that he, as your father, wanted to understand the terms of the lease in case he needed to step in and co-sign to ensure I received my payments on time. He made it sound like he was trying to help you." I felt a hot flash of shame and anger. My father had painted me as a charity case, a flighty girl in over her head, to the man who had entrusted me with his property. "Mr. Henderson," I said, my voice shaking with fury, "I can assure you I have no financial anxieties. My rent will be paid on time every time. My father was acting without my knowledge or permission." To his credit, Mr. Henderson sounded horrified. "Oh, my dear, I am so sorry. I thought it was odd. He was asking if the lease was transferable." I told him absolutely, not without your express written consent. The final piece of the puzzle was the money. My father was an accountant. He was meticulous. He wouldn't make a move like this without seeing a financial benefit. Henry and I sat down with my business plan, my loan documents, and my sales figures from the first few days. The opening weekend had been a massive success. I had sold out of almost everything and made back a significant chunk of my initial ingredient investment. My projections weren't just optimistic, they were on track to being conservative. "He's not trying to save you from failure, Maddie," Henry said, pointing at the spreadsheet on my laptop. "He's trying to steal your success. He sees these numbers, he sees the potential, and he wants his cut. He wants control of the asset." We found an old email from months ago when I had sent my dad the business plan for his opinion. His reply had been dismissive, but attached was a file I'd never opened, thinking it was just some boring tax document. It was a mock-up of a partnership agreement. A family investment LLC, with him as the managing partner holding a 51% controlling stake in my business, in exchange for financial oversight and management. He had this planned from the very beginning. He was just waiting for the right moment to implement it. The missed grand opening wasn't just a slight, it was a tactic. It was meant to destabilize me, to make me feel alone and unsupported, to make me more receptive to his generous offer to step in and save me. Every piece fit. The lies, the manipulation, the manufactured concern. Sifting through the betrayal felt like excavating my own life, only to find that the foundations were rotten. But with the truth laid bare, the grief began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my kindness for weakness. And they had no idea how badly they had miscalculated. The anger didn't burn out. It settled into a low, steady heat like the pilot light in my ovens. It was a fuel. For days, I had been reacting to their actions, to the missed party, the lies, the takeover attempt. Now it was time for me to act. The revenge I envisioned wasn't about screaming matches or petty sabotage. That was their style, not mine. My revenge would be like my baking, precise, methodical, and built from the ground up with the best ingredients. The primary ingredient was success. The secondary and most important was absolute, unbreakable independence. "They want a business meeting, they want to discuss the bakery," I said to Henry as we sat in the shop late one night, surrounded by the comforting smell of cooling bread. "Fine, we'll give them a business meeting, but it's going to be on my terms." The plan began to take shape, each step carefully measured. It wouldn't be a simple no. It would be a presentation, a declaration of independence so thorough and irrefutable that they would have no ground left to stand on. First, I secured my defenses. I took Henry's advice and spent a day with a small business lawyer he recommended. I explained the situation, my father's unauthorized contact with my landlord, and his attempt to insert himself into my finances. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Ms. Albright, was appalled. We drafted a cease and desist letter, to be kept in reserve, formally telling my father to have no further contact with any of my business associates, suppliers, or my landlord. We also reinforced the legal structure of my business, making sure my LLC was ironclad. Walking out of her office, a folder of legally binding documents in my bag, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a business negotiation, and I was arming myself accordingly. Next, I focused on the business itself. I worked tirelessly, from before dawn until late at night. I refined my recipes, introduced a daily special that had people lining up, and started a social media account for the bakery, posting beautiful photos of the pastries. Henry designed gorgeous graphics, and the account took off. The community response was incredible. I was getting rave reviews online. A local food blogger wrote a glowing piece, calling the rolling pin the best new gem in the city. My sales figures weren't just good, they were exceptional. I was exceeding my business plan's projections for month 3 in my first 3 weeks. Every dollar I earned, every 5-star review, was another brick in the fortress I was building around my dream. While I was building my success, I maintained a carefully controlled silence with my family. I replied to my parents' increasingly insistent texts with polite, noncommittal answers. "I'm very busy, but I'd like to schedule a proper family dinner to discuss everything. Let's do it next Saturday at my apartment." They agreed immediately, likely assuming my silence and invitation meant I was capitulating. They probably imagined me, humbled and scared, ready to accept their help. I wanted them to walk into that dinner confident, arrogant even. Their overconfidence would be my greatest advantage. Henry was my co-conspirator in all of this. He helped me prepare a detailed presentation. We compiled everything: the stellar sales data, the profit and loss statements, the glowing online reviews, the article from the food blogger. We also included a section detailing my father's interference, including a written statement from my landlord about their conversation and the date of the restaurant booking for Archie's party. It was a dossier of my success and their deceit. The final piece of the plan was the most important. The lawyer, Ms. Albright, had introduced me to a non-profit organization that provided microloans and mentorship to women-owned small businesses. I applied, and using my incredible first-month data, I was not only approved for a small loan to expand my equipment, but I was also paired with a mentor, a retired CEO of a successful food company. This mentorship was more valuable than any loan. It was a vote of confidence from the world outside my family, a validation from people who saw me as a businesswoman, not just a little girl playing. With Flour, the plan was set. The dinner would be the stage. I would cook for them, serving them a meal in the apartment I paid for with my own hard-earned money. I would let them talk, let them lay out their concerns and their solutions. I would let them walk right into the trap of their own making. Then, when they were finished, I would serve dessert, and with it, I would serve the truth. I would present them with my success, my evidence, my legal protection, and my new allies. This wasn't about hurting them for the sake of it. It was about severing the puppet strings. It was about showing them, in undeniable black and white terms, that their opinion of me was no longer relevant. Their validation was no longer the prize. My revenge was not a dish best served cold. It was a perfectly proofed loaf of bread, ready to be pulled from the oven, its crust golden and unbreakable. The night of the dinner, my small apartment was filled with the aroma of slow-braised beef and rosemary. I had set the table with my best dishes, the ones I'd bought from a second-hand store and cherished. Everything was deliberate. I wanted the setting to be calm, civilized, and entirely under my control. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like a director watching the opening scene of a play she had written. My family arrived precisely at 7. Archie came with them, the first time I'd seen him since before the opening. They walked in bearing gifts, a bottle of wine from my father, a potted orchid from my mother. Gestures of peace from an army that believed it had already won the war. "Madeline, your place is so cozy," my mother said, looking around. "A bit small, but cozy." Archie surveyed my tiny living room with a smirk. "Nice. I'm surprised you have time to cook with how busy you must be playing shop." I ignored the barb, offering a tight smile. "I make time for what's important. Please, sit down." The conversation over dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. They spoke of Archie's new responsibilities as vice president, the larger office he was getting, the company car. My father steered the conversation toward the economy, inflation, and the precarious position of small businesses in this climate. It was all a lead-up, a carefully constructed narrative designed to make me feel small and insecure. I let them talk. I served the food, refilled their glasses, and played the part of the dutiful daughter. I listened as they subtly, and not so subtly, tore down my dream while praising Archie's ascent. Finally, as I cleared the main course plates, my father leaned back in his chair and took a sip of wine. "Madeline," he said, his voice taking on the serious, paternal tone he used when he was about to lay down the law. "We're glad we're doing this. Your mother and I and Archie, we've been very concerned. We support your passion, we truly do, but passion doesn't pay the bills." "Your father is right," my mom added, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "We have a proposal that will ensure the rolling pin is a long-term success and that your inheritance isn't lost." Archie chimed in, the picture of magnanimity. "Look, Maddie, we all know baking is your thing, but Dad knows numbers. Let him handle the boring stuff so you don't run this thing into the ground. It's a good offer. You should take it." This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I returned not with dessert, but with a sleek, professional-looking folder for each of them. I placed one in front of my father, one in front of my mother, and one in front of Archie. They looked at the folders, then at me, their expressions a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "I appreciate your concern for my business," I began, my voice clear and steady, all traces of the hurt daughter gone, replaced by the confident business owner. "So, I've prepared a small presentation to address your points." I let them open the folders. The first page was a one-sheet summary of my first month's performance. The revenue numbers, the net profit, the customer growth statistics. All of it printed in crisp, black ink. I saw my father's eyes widen slightly as he scanned the figures. He knew numbers, and these numbers were undeniably good. "As you can see," I continued, "my projections were not optimistic. They were conservative. We are currently tracking 40% ahead of the business plan I showed you. The food blog feature alone increased our daily traffic by 25%. I let that sink in before directing them to the next page. "You mentioned your concerns about my ability to manage the business. I share the belief that seeking expert advice is crucial, which is why last week I accepted a mentorship with Sarah Jennings." My mother gasped. Sarah Jennings was a local legend, a woman who had built a small catering company into a national gourmet food brand. She's a mentor from the Women's Entrepreneurial Fund, which has also approved my business for a Phase 2 expansion loan, should I choose to accept it. I looked directly at my father. They reviewed my finances and my business plan quite thoroughly. They seemed to believe I am, in fact, a businesswoman. My father's face had gone rigid, his genial mask crumbling. Archie was just staring at the papers, his jaw slack. The final section of the folder was titled Third-Party Communications. In it was the printed-out email from the restaurant confirming Archie's party had been booked a month in advance, and a signed statement from my landlord, Mr. Henderson, detailing my father's call and his attempt to have the lease transferred. I watched as my mother's face went pale. I watched as my father read Mr. Henderson's words, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the pages. "You went behind my back," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You lied to me, you disrespected me, and you tried to sabotage my business relationship with my landlord by painting me as an incompetent child. You didn't miss my grand opening by accident. You skipped it because you were waiting for me to fail. You didn't come to help. You came to take over." The silence in the room was absolute. They had nothing to say. The evidence was overwhelming, my case laid out with chilling precision. They had walked in expecting a negotiation with a daughter. They were facing an audit from a CEO. I walked to my desk and picked up one last piece of paper. This is a copy of a formal cease and desist letter drafted by my lawyer. It states that you, Kyle, are to have no further contact with any of my business affiliates. If you violate it, we will proceed with legal action for tortious interference. I placed it on the table in front of him. As for the family partnership, I said, my gaze sweeping over all three of them, the offer is rejected. My mother will not be managing my front of house. My brother will offer no input, and my father will have no access to my books, my profits, or my business, ever. I paused, letting the finality of the words settle. This is my bakery. I built it, I own it, and I will succeed without you. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early morning. I pointed to the door. I think this dinner is over. They left without another word. The shock on their faces was a grotesque mixture of anger, humiliation, and disbelief. My mother looked like she wanted to cry, but my father's stony glare kept her silent. Archie just looked small. Stripped of his usual arrogance, he seemed confused, like a player who had just discovered the game was rigged against him for once. The door clicked shut behind them, and the silence they left was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard. I didn't crumble. I didn't cry. I walked back to the table, gathered their untouched folders, and slid them neatly into a drawer. Then I went into the kitchen, cut myself a large slice of the chocolate silk pie I had planned to serve for dessert, and sat down to eat it alone. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. It tasted like victory. It tasted like freedom. The days that followed were quiet. There were no more pleading texts, no more angry voicemails. It was as if a constant, buzzing static in the background of my life had finally been switched off. The silence was unnerving at first, a void where decades of family obligation had been. But slowly, I began to fill that void with other things. With the cheerful morning greetings from my regular customers. With late-night brainstorming sessions with Henry over new branding ideas. With long, encouraging phone calls with my new mentor, Sarah, who was teaching me more about supply chain management than my father had taught me in my entire life. My world, which had once revolved around the gravitational pull of my family's expectations, was now reorienting itself around a new center, me. The bakery thrived. Word of mouth, combined with a few more positive local articles, kept the place bustling. I had to hire a part-time employee, a bright college student named Maya, to help me with the morning rush. The first time I signed her paycheck, using the profits I had generated myself, was a moment of profound pride. This was real. I was a business owner, an employer. About a month after the dinner, Henry and I were closing up the shop when my brother Archie appeared at the door. He looked hesitant, stripped of his usual swagger. I unlocked the door and let him in, my expression neutral. He stood awkwardly in the middle of the shop, looking around. "It's really nice, Maddie," he said quietly. "You did a great job." I didn't say thank you, I just waited. "Look," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "What Dad tried to do was wrong. I see that now. He got me to go along with it, telling me you were going to lose everything and that this was the only way to protect the family's investment. He made it sound like a rescue mission. It was my investment, Archie, not the family's," I corrected him calmly. He nodded, looking down at his expensive shoes. "I know, and missing your opening, there's no excuse. I was arrogant. I always just assumed my stuff was more important. I'm sorry." It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my brother apologize for anything. It was a clumsy, self-serving apology, but it felt genuine. I didn't know if it was enough to repair decades of being treated as a second-class citizen in my own family, but it was a start. "I appreciate you saying that, Archie," I said, and I left it at that. No absolution. No, it's okay. Just an acknowledgement. He seemed to understand, gave a small, sad nod, and left. My parents never apologized. I received a stiff, formal email from my father a few weeks later, stating that he was deeply disappointed in my hostile and ungrateful attitude, but that he would respect my wishes to not be involved in my business. My mother simply went silent. The loss of them was an ache, a phantom limb that sometimes twinged with sadness for the family I wished I had. But the peace that replaced the constant anxiety of trying to please them was a balm on that wound. My new family was the one I was building. It was Henry, who believed in me before I had a single customer. It was Sarah, my mentor, who saw my potential and challenged me to be better. It was Maya, my employee, who looked up to me. It was my customers, who made my little bakery a part of their daily lives. One evening, a few months later, I was cashing out the register when an elderly woman came in. She was one of my regulars, a widow named Mrs. Gable who always bought a single slice of apple pie. "You know, dear," she said as I boxed up her pie, "my husband and I used to come to this very spot when it was a bookstore. We had our first date here. Seeing you bring so much life and sweetness back into this place. It feels like coming home." Her words filled me with a warmth that had nothing to do with the ovens. This was what Nana Rose meant by feeding the soul. I hadn't just built a business. I had built a community. I had created a place of warmth and welcome, all on my own. As I locked up that night, I looked around my beautiful, thriving bakery, my sweet-smelling sanctuary. I had lost a family, but I had found myself. And that was the sweetest success of all.